Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and passionate advocates of the climate. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everyone. It is my sincerest honor to welcome you today to our second UTalk public debate, this time on climate change. Following the first one we held on peace and reconciliation back in April 2025. Here in the heart of Qatar. As an organization whose mission transcends borders and disciplines, UNESCO recognizes that climate change is not merely an environmental issue, it's a cultural, educational, scientific, and ethical challenge. It affects the very fabric of our societies, from the preservation of World Heritage sites threatened by rising seas to the safeguarding of indigenous knowledge systems that offer sustainable solutions rooted in centuries of wisdom. Today, we stand at a critical juncture. The science is clear, the impacts are visible. From the desertification we are witnessing in the Sahel to the coral bleaching in the Pacific, from the heat waves in Europe to floods in South Asia, and here in the Gulf, we face rising temperatures, scarcity of water, and the need for resilient urban planning. UNESCO's response is multifaceted. Through our Intergovernmental Oceanic Commission, we advance marine climate research. Through our cultural initiatives, we protect heritage at risk. And through our global networks like the UNESCO chairs and biosphere reserves, we foster collaboration across nations and disciplines. Yet, UNESCO has significant response to climate change through its large sector, which is education, which is our Program 1 in education. And it includes the basic education, technical vocational education and training, and higher education. UNESCO promotes climate change education as a cornerstone of sustainable development, empowering individuals with the knowledge, skills, and values to take meaningful climate action. Our program promotes climate change education as a human right. UNESCO advocates that climate change, or the education on climate change, is a universal right, essential for equipping people to understand and address the climate crisis. It aligns with the Action for Climate Empowerment, this agenda that is under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, which calls on governments to educate and engage all stakeholders. Our flagship Education for Sustainable Development program ensures that climate change education is embedded within strategies and policies to help learners make informed decisions and take responsible actions for environmental integrity, economic viability, and social justice. UNESCO also leads the Greening Education Partnership, which was launched at the COP27, which aims to integrate climate education into all levels of schooling. It covers greening the schools and the universities, greening the curriculum, greening the teachers' training, and greening the communities. UNESCO also supports teacher training programs and youth-led climate initiatives, ensuring that educators and students become agents of change. And through our Monitoring Education for Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability project, UNESCO tracks how countries integrate climate education into policies and curricula. But the real power lies not in institutions alone. It lies in the people, in educators, those who inspire change, in scientists who uncover solutions, in policymakers who act with courage, and in communities who adapt with resilience. Let the second UTalk event be a catalyst. Let it spark dialogue, innovation, and commitment, especially that it is a pre-COP30 event, a flagship event now. And I would like to take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thanks and sincere gratitude to our esteemed partners, mainly the Middle East Council for Global Affairs, QatarDebates, the Swedish Embassy in Qatar, Japan Embassy, for their joint and collaborative efforts in making today's event a reality. Your unwavering support and dedication have been instrumental in bringing this initiative to life, and we are truly grateful for all your support and partnership. Together, through knowledge, culture, and science, we can absolutely shape the future, a future where climate action is not an obligation, but a shared aspiration. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this event organized by the Middle East Council on Global Affairs in collaboration with UNESCO's Regional Office for Gulf States in Yemen, the Qatar Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Doha Debates, and with the support of the embassies of Sweden and Japan. Thank you for joining us today. This event, we're hoping, aims to elevate the narrative around climate action in the Gulf ahead of the 2025 UN Climate Change Conference, COP30, that's being held in Brazil next month. My name is Nader Kabani. I'm a senior fellow and program director with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Gulf countries have made sustainable development and climate action cornerstones of their national visions and development strategies. Qatar has set an ambitious target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030 and aims to generate 18% of its power through renewable sources by 2030. The UAE aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 31% by 2030 and generate 50% of its power through clean energy by 2050. Saudi Arabia too aims to reduce, avoid, and remove 278 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually and generate 50% of its power from renewable sources by 2030. These are all very big, broad ambitions that really get to the heart of the fact that climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and sustainable development are at the core of Gulf development strategies. In pursuing their climate mitigation strategies, Gulf countries are relying on a wide variety of activities that would allow them to meet climate targets while pursuing economic growth and diversification. For example, expanding the use of renewable energy, especially solar and nuclear power, improving energy efficiency through incentives and regulations, exploring new technologies, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen, expanding the production of transition fuels, including LNG. Gulf countries have also taken the lead in developing climate adaptation measures. The region is expected to be among the most affected by climate change and rising temperatures, and is among the most water-stressed in the world. And so it's placing climate adaptation at the heart of its strategies, including developing sustainable agriculture through climate-smart practices and water conservation, advancing green desalination, and integrating renewable energy to enhance water security and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And looking at skills, attracting people with the knowledge, skills, and talent to work in the green economy and to support their economic diversification efforts. There's much to celebrate at the international stage in terms of what Gulf countries are achieving and hoping to achieve in the future. But GCC countries, sometimes have been reluctant to showcase their ambitions and achievements or have not been doing enough. And so part of what we want to do in this panel discussion is to really elevate and highlight and bring to the fore some of these strategies, some of these achievements, and some of these activities. And to do this, we've assembled a panel of experts, expert scholars, policy practitioners involved in climate action, both in the Gulf and globally. Our discussion today, also very importantly, will be followed by a youth panel led by young climate-informed activists to discuss climate challenges and solutions from the Gulf perspective. So please join us for both panels today. With us today, I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly. Talha Mirza is a program manager at EarthNA and leads EarthNA's sustainability test beds and pilot projects. He brings 15 years of experience working on sustainability, climate change, and renewable energies, including the solar test facility in Qatar Science Technology Park. Ola Altera is chief executive of the Swedish Climate Policy Council. He has extensive experience in climate, energy, and sustainability issues from industry, politics, and government. He has previously served as Secretary of State at the Ministry of Industry and Economic Affairs. Dabi Al-Muhannadi is Associate Professor at the College of Science and Engineering at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Her work focuses on the systematic design of sustainable processes, resource management, and climate policies. She is the author of several publications and has won many research and teaching awards and serves on a number of boards within Qatar. She's also a graduate of the Qatar Leadership Center Rising Leaders Program. And last but not least, Anas Bouhlal is Regional Programs Specialist at UNESCO Regional Office for the Gulf States in Yemen, covering higher education and Tibet, an area where he has worked for over 30 years. Anas has worked at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, in Muscat, and in the regional office in Beirut. He's also been a professor at Qatar University in Finland, the Euro-Mediterranean University in Slovenia, and Le Havre University in France. So what we're going to do today is I'll begin by asking each panelist to weigh in broadly on a set of key questions of this panel. We're going to then have a short give and take on some questions from me, and then open it up to questions from the floor. So some of the key questions that brought us together today are: what climate mitigation and adaptation measures should Gulf countries focus on? How can Gulf countries balance their climate targets with economic diversification efforts? And what are some of the lessons learned from global practices that have special relevance for the Gulf and Qatar? And I'd like to begin with Talha, if you could, maybe.
Thank you so much, Nader, for setting us up. And thank you for inviting EarthNet to this really important discussion. Before I start talking about the questions, I'm just going to give a brief overview of EarthNet. EarthNet is a nonprofit policy research and advocacy center set up in Qatar Foundation. And our mission is to drive environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Our vision is sustainable societies in hot and arid environments, which is something that binds all the Gulf countries together. And I'll start off by answering the first two questions that you had put forward for this discussion. In terms of what climate mitigation and adaptation measures that Gulf countries should focus on, I think let's maybe spend a minute talking about what are the problems that bind us all together before we talk about the solutions. As mentioned, I think in the opening remarks as well, I won't go too much into the details, but extremely hot and arid climate, changing at a much higher pace than the rest of the world, which is making events like extreme heat and urban heat island impacts, as well as the increase in cooling degree days, worse over time. We obviously have that coupled with water scarcity, rapid urbanization, creating a cycle where our lives are becoming more and more energy intensive by the day. As cooling degree days result in increase of air conditioning use, and obviously our lives are sustained by desalinated water. everything being powered by coastal power plants. And at the same time, we have the degradation of the same coastal ecosystems and loss of biodiversity. I know it sounds very bleak, but that's just setting the stage. So with those problems, our focus in our view and in EarthNet's view, I speak on behalf of my organization here, should be on solutions that tackle these issues and focus on policies, frameworks, systems, as well as economic models that help us tackle a few of these areas, namely accelerate energy transition and make our systems more energy efficient, improve our water resources and governance, transform our built environment to be more climate resilient by introducing more nature-based solutions as well as more climate-sensitive urban design and planning. And I wouldn't say most importantly, but equally importantly, but very pressing, is the focus on restoring and safeguarding critical ecosystems, both coastal/marine as well as our drylands. And not just focus on, I know you mentioned green economy, but I think our focus needs to be not only on the green infrastructure and economy, but quote unquote blue as well. The second question that I wanted to touch a little bit on, you mentioned how can Gulf countries balance climate targets with economic diversification? And our strong view is that the two need not be economic trade-offs. One can be a major tool to achieve the other. So, looking at climate targets and achieving our climate targets can be a major tool to help us diversify our economy and achieve those objectives. First, we have some incredible work that my brilliant colleagues at EarthNet have done at making the case for this by looking at new frameworks at what sustainable growth can mean and looking at how wealth of a country should be looked at, simply beyond just simply looking at the GDP, and how it can include renewable as well as non-renewable natural capital, produced capital, human capital, and assets. This is loosely based on the World Bank's Changing Wealth of Nations report. I think we've talked about that in the past. And lastly, building on our local context and focusing on adaptation that's tailored to hot and arid environments. We're also developing, and I'm sure my colleague from the academia and Dr. Dabia might have some things to talk about it later on, but we have so much potential to have these solutions not only answer our challenges, but also develop our own IP, create jobs, and build an exportable portfolio of arid climate resilience technologies and solutions, which can turn in all these critical vulnerabilities that I started off with, can turn them into a key pillar of our knowledge-based economic diversification strategy. We've got so much happening, not only in Qatar, but also Saudi, UAE, other Gulf countries, so much research, academia, and solutions being developed that are tailored and to our local context, to hot and arid regions, and this could be a huge strength for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nader. And first of all, thanks to UNESCO and the Media Council for inviting me to this important conversation. It's a true privilege to be part of it and also have a chance for me to learn all what's going on in Qatar and the Gulf region, which is really interesting. Sweden, a small country far in the north of Europe, might feel distant from here. But coming to the region also previously in the capacity of deputy minister, I always felt a certain connection. We are countries that has built prosperity and welfare in a tough climate. Just that what took us more than 100 years, you have done in a few decades in a truly impressive development. Qatar further is a small country playing a much larger role on the world scene, mediating and bridging conflicting sides, which is also very much part of a Swedish history in global cooperation. And also, this is a country in the region that's, investing a lot now in research and education, which has also been a core strategy of the Nordics and of Sweden. And of course, we have both ends benefited from this fossil economy, building wealth and welfare that's not been seen on this planet any time before. And now we are kind of urgently at the task of bridging this to the next phase, to something that could also be sustainable for us and the next generation. And to bring just a few general reflections from a Swedish and Nordic perspective, we started climate policy in the early 90s already, being part of that Kyoto Protocol and also domestically. And we have set several intermediate targets for emissions reductions since then. And actually, we achieved all of them. We have overachieved, and it has been faster, easier, and at a lower cost than expected when we set the targets. And I think that is encouraging as such. If you put the targets, you start working, you keep on track with policy and bringing stakeholders, then innovation will come, and there will be solutions that you don't really know about when you start out that journey. So I think that's something to bring with us, even at this time where things might on the world scene be more complex and parts problematic. When it comes then on this question on main mitigation measures in the region and for all of us, I guess it's obvious that the energy transition is a core part of it. And I think especially Qatar has a interesting position there with your focus on natural gas. Not only that it has a lower fossil footprint compared to oil or coal, but also that it goes very well to integrate with renewables with flexible systems, and that is an important asset, I think. And if I would, for a second, be part of leadership in this region, I guess I would go aggressively for large volumes of renewable electricity production in here, efficiency, including electrification on transport, storage, and so on. Then I think you can showcase such a system where renewables goes together with peak loads, with gas. And it will also bring learnings and potential further export markets and incomes for the country and the region, because you will build capacity in a wider area within the energy systems. And as I understand it, I'm not an expert, but it would make economic sense to put your gas on the export market and reduce your domestic use. And then finally, of course, reducing territorial emissions and reaching your climate targets. To me, it seems like something that makes both economic sense and sense to the rest of the world. Then, of course, looking a bit further, medium term, we know that we need to go down to zero mid this century, and then even below zero negative emissions in a global perspective. So then I think all the research, the things you have started connecting to CCS, carbon storage and carbon use is also important to bring that to realities and quite soon in volumes, actually. And that might be a surprising connection here as well with Sweden, since we do not have the fossil resources ourselves. But actually now in Stockholm, the Stockholm Exergi, the city energy company, is building, they're quite far. In a few years, they should have up and running a carbon capture facility there, capturing like 0.8 million tons of CO2 from bioenergy, making it bringing negative emissions. But I mean, the basic technologies are the same, whatever energy source you're using. So even there, that should be connections that could be further developed. And with doing this, I think then natural gas will make sense for a much longer period, and in a way, give you a license to operate for a longer period, and building credibility on the world stage further than what you already are doing. And then on this cooperation, I think cooperation in general is a common challenge. We need to do this together, so that should be a main strategy wherever you are. And one thing relevant now to the energy transition to mention is maybe the Nordic electricity market. It was very early, surely the most integrated regional electricity market anywhere in the world. the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and I think can learn from that. It gives the possibility to much more efficiently integrate different renewables, solar and the wind is blowing in one place and not the other, but also nuclear, combined heat and power production, all those solutions, which you will gain both economically and from a climate perspective. So I think that would be there's great potential in the region for going that route, and I know that there's also within the discussion. And I would encourage that, and based on our experiences. Then I could say something about climate governance and the things where the Climate Policy Council is part of, but I guess we could come back to that in the discussions. Finally, maybe then on that question on how to balance the climate targets and the strive for economic diversification in the region. And I just wonder if the question is really if it's a balancing. To me, the climate and energy transition and the climate transition in a wider perspective, to a large extent, it is the diversification. It will not only introduce new technology, skill, training, and research, and all this, where UNESCO is an important part of it. But also, not only that, it's also increasing the role of services, culture, and all those other investments you are doing, which has a lower footprint, surely, than some other parts of the economy. But also is an important part of building sustainable societies with a high quality of life for us and also those coming after us in this region and also far up in the north. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Davia.
First of all, thank you so much for having me to join this prestigious panel. And thank you for my colleagues on the panel already have covered excellent points. I think it's really important to reiterate that we are in the Gulf. We're not expecting climate change impact, but we're already in a post-climate change world. We already had the longest day with the highest temperatures. We already seen days with the largest amount of rainfall that we used to get in 1 year in 1 day. We already have seen some impacts that affect our food supply chain, maybe not directly in the GCC, but in our partners where we import most of our food. And it's really important to reiterate again, even though we are hydrocarbon exporters, at the heart of it, hydrocarbons were the essential part that enabled life in the GCC. Water does not exist naturally, except in very few places in Arabia, not in Qatar. There is a lot of places that are not suitable. The soil itself is not suitable for any food growth. And already high temperatures have shown like how people would migrate and so on. So what it looks like that we rely a lot on our hydrocarbons for life, and we know how to do it very well. So we had already a lot of oil production. Qatar went through its first energy transition already, shifting from oil to gas that happened in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And we're now merging into another transition that will happen. And as you can see, it happened not because, we've seen just climate change impacts. It happened because of necessity. Oil production was going down. We discovered that we needed to adapt and make use of gas and associated gas. And then we figured out what the technology was there, even though the technology was not mature. So there was a lot of learning already and a lot of experience within the GCC going through energy transition and adapting to the resources that are available. So in terms of thinking of climate mitigation, there's already have been some efforts. You've seen carbon capture and storage here in Ras Laffan, some studies already in the UAE. The UAE and Saudi have already looked into alternative fuels like nuclear energy for energy production. And there has been huge investments in renewables. And again, the investment in renewable came not just from climate targets and climate policies, but because it became economically viable and the technology was deployable. So there is rationale became not just helping the environment, but also creating, maybe lowering our own consumption of oil and gas locally so we can export more. So I think what will happen is the GCC would look into maximizing the income that will come from the hydrocarbon, looking into how can we use that income for future diversification issues. And already the sovereign wealth funds have shown that trajectory, taking income coming from fossil fuel production, allocating some funds to climate resilient solutions, and future technologies like batteries, alternative resources for energy production, water security, and so on. Well, the Gulf is protected somewhat because of geography from sea level rise. Sea level rise already is happening. There is, I think, the majority of the population already is living alongside the coast. In Qatar, 95% of the population lives alongside the coast. So I think the municipality already have recognized this as a risk, that we will have more of maybe sea level rise, but we already have learned about that in the past because Qatar is a very shallow geography land in terms of the land itself, because we have water actually underneath Qatar. If you dig, you find water. So we need to learn how to build new things with water already rising. And I think that also has been acknowledged with the extreme weather events when we had extreme rainfall. So I think one of the mitigation issues is creating flexibility and some sort of understanding of what are the high-risk areas that will be impacted by either a huge rainfall or sea level rise. And I think the urban planning has looked into that as a risk, but as a reality that also it's what we already seen examples of. In terms of adaptation, as Talha mentioned, there has been focus on nature-based solutions with the mangrove project. But also we have to understand our limitations in nature-based solutions. We cannot grow forest in Qatar, or we are limited in what we can grow in. The land is arid, soil is very poor, and you don't have water. So what would work, for example, in Sweden, it wouldn't work in Qatar. So we're thinking, okay, what are the technologies that could work? Direct air capture, it seemed like a good technology for mitigation and maybe eventually later on for adaptation. But also we have to think about where do we deploy these technologies and so on. So I think the GCC is already looking into all of these in terms of R&D solutions, in terms of climate strategies. And I think there's some efforts, maybe not unified, but there's some scattered effort for sure.
Thank you, Dabia. Anas.
Thank you so much. And I think it's nice to see that so many of you today respond to our invitation, and I think I'm so happy to see that people had responded to this invitation. And when we were designing the content of this event with our partners from QatarDebates and also from the Middle East Council for Global Affairs, what the main question was, what are we bringing new to the debate? So what's really in this important topic related, which is really timing, and I think it's pre-COP30, but what is the new things which will be debated here in today's meeting, mainly where policymakers are attending, diplomats are attending, then academia, and also bringing some voices and experiences from outside of the region. So, and I think the most important what's I'm trying to share with you from UNESCO side has been delivered by my director just on his opening speech on the work what UNESCO is doing in this field, and how UNESCO is responding to the climate change through different major pillars of its own activities. And I think if you allow me, Nader, that's one of the major things what we would like to come up with during the discussion today on the narratives. So we have mainly two narratives, but I think we have the European one, and inside the European one we have the Nordic one. So I think how this narrative can be comparative if it is possible. It can be just a narrative to compare or to discuss with the GCC one if it exists, and mainly with the narrative of the state of Qatar on the climate change. if this is possible. And I think this would be contribution from our side as UNESCO, to present some points of discussions to the policymakers in the country and even beyond on the GCC level. And I think we had this discussion also with the Japanese embassy, which is, as you know, the history of the climate change started from 90s with Japan. And I think we also would like to have this discussion, if possible, that's what we learned from the history and what has been really achieved right now from those things. And I think this is what we really like to bring to discussions. Most and even important is sharing with the best practices. And I think economies are a little bit different. If you compare the GCC economies, okay, we are all in transitions, all in Europe or beyond Europe, in Asia, we're still all going into the green transitions. So what's behind those green transitions? What the response from policymakers, academia, and also the private sector? And I think the specificity of the private sector here, it's very dominant because we are the sectors who are very targeted, oil and gas. And then I think my colleague, previous one, just mentioned that we have passed through two transitions from the oil to the gas, and now from the gas towards the knowledge economy. And I think this is also important to share. Last but not the least is we would love to share with you from UNESCO perspective our findings. We've done global questions and we found the response to them on why the climate change is UNESCO's mother, why the climate change is UN mother. And also, this is on a global perspective, but I think we also conducted regional studies on the region for GCC and to see how the GCC is responding into the climate change on those questions which we just raised. And I think this is why this panel I think would be very rich in debates, and I hope that we'll be having a really nice debate on that. And the last, also the point is, what I would put on discussion is, okay, we are in GCC, many things are brilliant, are very good, or intended to be very nice. And I think, can we do together on the points what we have been successfully achieving good results and be joining the efforts with UNESCO, with other partners to help those who are still in need globally to respond to the climate issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anas, and thank you to all the panelists for kicking us off. Let me start with Talha. I mean, you gave us a very good overview of the key issues that Gulf countries are facing in terms of climate adaptation, mitigation, and Earth is doing some really interesting work, like you said, on the issues of, let's say, looking at more of a wealth accounting framework and looking at some of these perspectives differently. It's something that Anas was mentioning as well. But one point you touched on very briefly, and I hope you can expand on, is the issue of the blue economy. I think this is something that we haven't discussed quite as much, but Qatar is a peninsula surrounded by coastal waters, and there really is the issue of marine biodiversity, coastal resilience. I'm wondering, and Dabia touched on this issue briefly as well in her comments. I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a bit more about this issue and what should be done and what can be done more to elevate the narrative and understanding of this aspect.
Thank you. I've been removing the waters because I feel like I'm always gonna elbow them. I'm gonna build on a few things that, as you mentioned, Davia mentioned, and it's not only specific to Qatar. Qatar is a peninsula. Most of 3 sides surrounded by coast. Bahrain's an island, but then all the other population centers in the Gulf, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, even Fujairah on the other side, Jeddah, they're all coastal regions, and they're the major population centers in the Gulf. As Dabia mentioned, sea level rise is already happening, and we're already seeing impacts of climate change on an annual basis. It's not something that is that we're planning for under specific scenarios. And as Debbie mentioned, we cannot grow a forest in Qatar, which actually reminds me, also ties to Anas's point, but I'll come to it in a bit. But I was at the Qatar National Dialogue on climate change a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember who said it, but I remember what was said. It was that, save the forests when we come, talk about environmental sustainability and climate change. Save the forest is a very Western narrative. And I know Anas spoke about narratives and how it impacts framing, which impacts solutions that we talk about and what we discuss. For Gulf, it's not save the forest. We don't have forests, like Tabia mentioned. For us, it's save the oceans. Our livelihood and everything that we do, most of it is impacted. We live on the coasts, and our livelihood depends on saving the oceans. It's one of the key strategic pillars at Earth. Now, our coasts enable our economies, our coastal and marine tourism, our food sources, our fisheries and aquaculture, our maritime transport and ports. And of course, our main water source, desalination. So without protecting and building our coastal resilience, sustaining life here is difficult. And I'm not just talking about Qatar, I'm talking about the Gulf. It's one of the things that, again, unites us all. So earlier in the summer, we launched, EarthNow launched the Blue Economies for Coastal Resilience program in partnership with the MENA Oceans Initiative from the UAE. The idea is to accelerate regenerative blue economies, strengthen climate resilience in coastal cities, protect marine biodiversity, and unlock investments in ocean infrastructure across the Gulf and MENA region. It's got several phases. It's a long-term program, but it'll focus on 6 key sectors: maritime transport, coastal tourism, offshore energy, fisheries, desalination, and coastal development. And one of the first activities is doing a gap analysis and identifying opportunities for what needs to be focused on across the Gulf, and putting together a first set of plan for what needs to be done over the next few years. And that report and research is underway right now.
Very cool. Thank you so much for this. I'm hopeful that other panelists will weigh in as well and build on what you've said. Ola, I think I love the experience that you shared with us, and a rather optimistic view of the work that has been done so far in Scandinavian countries, as well as the possibility that targets can be achieved, at even lower cost and at faster times, because innovation kicks in, things are learned, and this feeds into the whole idea of what an economy can look like and what it can generate. And like you said, it's not an if and or situation. Economic diversification and climate adaptation and mitigation go hand in hand. I want to ask you some questions about some of those and dig a little bit deeper into some of the ideas that you said, but I also want to hear about your experience in the council. And my understanding is that such climate policy councils have become more and more prevalent in countries around the world. Can you tell us a bit more about kind of the work that you're doing and how that feeds into policymaking, and maybe what a country like Qatar or the Gulf could benefit from adapting a similar model?
Thank you. Yeah, certainly. To start from the Swedish example then, the Swedish Climate Policy Council was set up in 2018. There were others before us, United Kingdom, Denmark, and a few others, I think. That's when we had our present climate law. The climate law basically making it, saying that the government, they need to set all their work in direction for the long-term climate targets, which are then set by the parliament and the government. The climate target as such, and then the climate council. And our task is to evaluate the whole set of policies of the government, not just some specific environmental policy, but as mentioned already, the integration in transport, industry, education and science, or whatever. So it's a truly broad mandate, acting partly as a watchdog seeing if the government, are they really on track now with the targets they have set up themselves, but maybe in spirit more of an advisor, trying to help policy and the broader policy landscape to move further, and which I think is a challenge everywhere, just this integration between different policy areas, and to see that the climate, the strategies are integrated in all aspects. So it's about, and our council is basically academics, professors, not climate science. We do have the IPCC, that's basically a global thing, even if you need to know the regional consequences, but rather on technology, economy, social science, even historians. We have had to bring the broader perspective of developing the society, but also in a way of bringing in the stakeholders. We're talking to them a lot and listening to the message they bring also. And then we, just a few years later, together with the UK and others, we set up this our global network now, the International Climate Councils Network, informal and it's a moving organization still, but we now have members on all continents, many in Europe, but also South America, Asia, in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, the large regional powers there. So far, no one in the Gulf region. We would welcome that, certainly. And I think we have learned a lot and gained a lot from this network, since no one has done this transition before, and even then evaluating overall policies to long-term targets. So we're learning from each other constantly. And I think it partly includes the narrative aspects as well. Sometimes they are surprisingly close to each other, more than you think. And sometimes you realize that we're coming from different directions, but somewhere they still connect. So in many aspects, it has been important for our work. And I think the network as such would benefit from the perspective from Qatar or the Gulf region, obviously. And gradually, I think, even if this is a young organization and we don't really aspire to be a big thing, rather work on the quality, but we're starting also in having some input to the UNFCCC and the UN process, and hopefully then bring some on the ground member states' experience into the negotiation process, which sometimes tends to be very, very negotiative, so to say. And so I think in many aspects that has been important, and that governance aspects of keeping on track, being transparent, and inviting stakeholders is important. And part of that, we also, together with some other agencies in Sweden, developed a web-based visualization tool, which has also helped stakeholders to understand where are the missions, where are the solutions, where can I put in my efforts. And that's also one way we're trying to kind of help the economy as such to move on.
Thank you, Ola. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the panel again. It's always a pleasure to hear from your perspective, because you really managed to cover a wide variety of topics from a very technical perspective, but keep it accessible and very practical in terms of, okay, what really we need to focus on. What's interesting to me in terms of what you said also was the policy dimension, and specifically looking at the issues of what Gulf countries need to do in terms of integrating climate issues more into their strategic planning, and flexibility in terms of really in terms of their modeling and assessments. So it's kind of this bridge that links up between some of the issues and the scientific part, as well as the policy orientation. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about, and it kind of builds on what a little bit Ola said, in terms of how do you practically build on this? How can you incorporate more of these climate risk assessment issues, economic planning, into the discussion and into policy planning and strategic thinking on these issues?
So I think what the GCC has already has recognized to one extent, but what needs to focus on a little bit more is climate impacts are no longer just a separate thing that you do on the side. but you take it into consideration when you're planning every sector of the economy. Thinking about the residential sector, you have to take into climate into impact in building codes, in ensuring that the infrastructure can be adaptable in case of any impacts. And there you can have also some lessons that can be looked at from Europe, for example, in terms of building codes and insulation, for example, for energy efficiency solutions. If you're looking into a different sector, for example, like the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector for us, I think there was a few attempts in the 1990s to grow food locally. And then in Qatar, we had the food security program that was launched in 2008 and then led to the food security strategy. And that was held very well when we had a time of crisis. Either through the blockade or during COVID, and during as well the Ukraine-Russia crisis with the wheat and changing in regulation in India as well for rice. So it showed us that actually taking risks into long-term planning does help, and it created more efficient solutions that could be applied locally. And we learned that very well in the agriculture sector. And now the call is, how can you innovate in that? In terms of thinking what could be agri-solutions or smart agri-solutions that could be implemented. And in there, it became an open entrepreneurship and research question with Qatar Research Development and Innovation, and with collaborations with European countries and institutes and with Asian institutes as well. So trying to find the best solution and how can you bring that into the GCC, and making the GCC as a ground of where you can think about that. There is also other efforts. If you think about how can you integrate climate risk into other sectors, like if we're talking about the energy sector, yes, it does take it into consideration in terms of building more efficient supply chains, better platforms, extraction, and better codes in terms of looking into emissions and accounting. Emission accounting is one thing that will be forced upon us if we don't come up with our own plan of how do we address that. So if you're thinking about the GCC, no longer we don't have a regulation to say, okay, this is the proper way of accounting for carbon dioxide. Do you do a life cycle assessment or do you do a gate-to-gate assessment? Who would bear that responsibility for the emission? Is it the exporter or the importer? We're not in those discussions, but I think we are very aware of them with with the National Climate Change Dialogues and being an active participant in international discussions about that. So it seems like you cannot avoid the climate issue. It's going to be everywhere. And I think when we're thinking about what was the question in terms of diversification, is it? It will be coming about as well. Thinking about areas of diversification, and you see where the GCC is headed. You had tourism, but it's no longer just normal tourism. You can have ecotourism. We're thinking about, say, aviation, and there's a lot of air carriers within the GCC. But then the aviation sector itself has a lot of emissions, so we need to think about, okay, other alternatives. How can you make that more efficient? And you can rely on your strength. You make fuels very well. Can you make sustainable aviation fuels? Can you learn from the Sweden example for taking municipal solid waste and using it waste to energy? Can we implement that in small nations like in the GCC and maybe in central collaboration together? So there's a lot of areas that could be implemented. The other ways of looking into diversifications, again, I think I mentioned that a little bit, was the sovereign funds. The sovereign funds are doing so well. Collectively, they're the largest capital where a lot of people are looking into the GCC and to fund new startups, to look into building new organizations. So I think they hold a lot of power. And if we impose, okay, we cannot maybe do a lot of things in terms of our hydrocarbon exports because we rely on it right now. Maybe in our future diversification efforts, are our solutions sustainable or not? Maybe we have to think about ESG, but our own standards for ESG as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And so Dabi has made a very, very important point. Is right now we're talking climate. The issues of climate mitigation, adaptation is practically everywhere. And it embeds everything we're doing from looking at everything from tourism sector to to transportation, and in your case, even looking at issues such as, you know, green skills, talent acquisition. I mean, so can you give us some examples, maybe, just in terms of, she set the stage very nicely for this. Maybe some examples from your experience in the UN, UNESCO especially, about the kinds of activities that you're doing and embedding the issues of climate change, and what kinds of, in your various programming, in your various activities, in your and the various initiatives that are going on.
Thank you, Nader. And I think to respond to your question, I wish to go back to the reasons behind why UNESCO respond to those questions, and that's what are those mainly why we conduct those research globally, and what are the finding of it, and why it becomes really an important issue to be solved by UNESCO. There are three major findings, and I think it will be maybe a little bit surprising us. The first one is around half of 100 countries reviewed had no mention of climate change in their national curriculum. And I think you understand now how serious we are, and how combating the climate change, the policy level, that's fine. But when it comes to implementation on the schools level or at the higher education institutions, here we are facing the big challenge. Second, while 95% of surveyed primary and secondary teachers felt that teaching climate change is important, but less than 30% expressed readiness to teach it. So it's another challenge which is put on the shoulders of UNESCO. And the third, what I think is that the importance to the next part of our panel discussion today with the youth is that 70% of the young people cannot explain the climate change meaning. And I think this is, or at least they can explain it on the superficial level, but not on a deeply knowledge. And this is, and I think, an alarming responsibility for those who are taking care of education system at all its stages, from the primary school into the university and through the research institutions. And I think this is why UNESCO came up with those 4 pillars, which the director just mentioned in the opening speech: green the curriculum for the basic schools and the green curriculum for the universities, teachers, because I have seen the reason why, and also green the curriculum. But last and not the least one is the green in the communities. And I think here the communities are local, regional, beyond regions are global. And this is where we see that the importance of long life learning is very crucial. We consider that response to the climate change, it's not only for or from environmental reasons only, but it has mainly 3 dimensions: environmental, economical, and also societal, where the education part is very important. Thank you, Nader.
Thank you, Anas. We have about 15 minutes or so, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to give audience members a chance to engage with our panelists. So I already have a couple of questions. Let me gather maybe 3 questions at a time, and then and give you a chance to respond. The gentleman, followed by the gentleman there. Do we have a microphone? Yes. Yes. Thank you.
محمد هاشم، برنامج لكل ربيع زهرة. في الحقيقة أنا سعيد بكون الأستاذ المتحدث الأخير أشار أنهم بحثوا ما هي ضرورات إضافة مؤتمر آخر يكرر ما تم الاتفاق عليه في مؤتمرات سابقة. لكني سأشير إلى نقاط ثلاثة بسرعة. النقطة الأولى تتعلق باستبعاد مسألة الغابات، بالرغم أنه في غابات استوائية على خط الاستواء. هذه الغابات بتتضاءل شمالا وجنوبا وصولا للمدارين، ومن حسن الحظ أن قطر تقع على أحد المدارين، على مدار السرطان أو بالقرب من مدار السرطان، وهذا ما بيوجب وجود نبات المانغروف القرم. القرم اللي هو بيقدم حلين. بيقدم الحل الأول وهو مسؤولية الخليج. ما هي مسؤولية الخليج المتميزة؟ الخليج وقطر لها دور أعلى كثيرا من السويد ومن غيرها، باعتبار أنه أكثر علماء تحلية المياه على مستوى كوكب الأرض هم المملكة العربية السعودية. فما أجدرنا بتكثيف البحث حول كيف يقوم نبات المانغروف، كيف يقوم بتحلية المياه ليتغذى هو شخصيا ويغذي البذور. وبالتالي فهذه مسؤولية أولى لا يمكن أن تتخطى دول مجلس التعاون. هذا من جانب. الجانب الآخر أيضا هي مسؤولية عن نبات المانغروف، أو اللي تسميه المنظمة العالمية بفقر شديد لنا أفي سينا مارينا، باعتبار أن ابن سينا هو أول من صنفه في دولة قطر. هذا شرف لنا للأسف، لكننا لا نستخدم هذا المصطلح ونستخدم القرم أو المانغروف بدلا منه. وهو أن هذا النبات بيقوم بالعملية التي تم الإشارة إليها، وهي مسألة الإمساك بالكربون وتثبيته في التربة. هذا النبات بيقوم به بدون الاحتياج إلى أي عمليات تكنولوجية ولا تقدم ولا غيره. فكيف لا نبحث في ما هي الآليات وكيف يقوم هذا النبات ونقدم هذه هدية لكوكب الأرض ولأنفسنا. في
شكرا دكتور.
أشكركم. النقطة الأخيرة أن تخص الاقتصاد الأزرق اللي ركز عليه المتحدث الأول، والحقيقة أيضا هذه مهمة على دولة قطر ودول المجلس إذا كان الحديث حوالين الابتكار والبحث عن الابتكار، فتقدم هدايا حول هذا المورد العظيم اللي بيضخ لكوكب الأرض أكثر من 60% من احتياجاته من الأكسجين. أشكركم.
شكرا أستاذ. Yes, the gentleman. Oh, perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for organizing of this timely panel. And also I would like to express my thanks and appreciation from distinguished panelists for present a very eloquent and a fruitful comment regarding of the subject. I have the one question. As you know very well that one of the most important challenges, or maybe better I can say the obstacle for the current world as it rightly raised by the United Nations Secretary General is the climate change and environment's dilemma. You know very well that one of the most important factors and the element that has a very vital role to access to the sustainable, safe and clean environment and the climate is the nuclear energy. And you know that it has a very important vital role to the access to the renewable energy and the improved efficiency in this field. My question is that what is your opinion about some states who try to monopolize and weaponize the nuclear energy for some state, and by dividing the state to the have or have not state according to the non-proliferation treaty? So what do you think about this group of states that try the injection and try to demonopolize this nuclear energy that has very important role for the reach to the safe, one of the aspect of this utilize of this nuclear energy for using the safe and the climate and the clean energy? Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Just I'm asking about the humanitarian and development sectors. There is a lot of refugees. There is the consequences of climate change, and this leads to a lot of refugees and IDPs and conflict either by natural or man-made. I just asking, what's the role of this PCC action to green the humanitarian and development sectors? For example, how the policies and frameworks that you are already in place to be bring down, to be streamlined into programs and projects that now currently implementing by the INGOs or humanitarian and development practitioners or INGOs is still working on it. So is it as to be as one of the cultures that to be streamlined and then all practitioners can be implemented? So it's still now we see that as policy and framework level not come down, these programs to be part of the one of the activities of the projects and program implemented by there's a lot of INGOs in Gulf implementing a lot of projects in across the globe, but the climate change programs and activities still it is not be part of the programs and projects. And in terms of the advocacy about the climate change also, is still not going on in the projects and programs. So, and then there is a lot of COPs. Now it's coming in COPs number 30, but there is a lot of lessons, best practices already, and there's a lot of recommendations. It's already happened there. Is there any evaluation or evaluation frameworks that to measure the progress of all the climate change actions that's happened or not?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get one more question in this round, and we'll hopefully have time for one more set.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking my question. I've been in this city for 13 years, and I've run it from one end to the other. And one thing that I've noticed during my runs is the number of tar sheet stations that have been opening up throughout the city to help with charging electric vehicles, which I think is a good step. Last week I was in Lebanon, and I ran the city from one end to the other, and I noticed solar panels all over the city. Why haven't I seen the solar panels here, considering we've got around 360 days of sunshine?
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to add also one more question and take advantage of our guests from Sweden and to build on something that you mentioned. And I just recently finished a book by a Danish engineer called Bent Flyberg, and he has accumulated one of the world's largest database of mega projects, and tries to assess what make them successful or not. He has a whole chapter on renewable energy and specifically wind energy in Denmark, and the amazing thing that they did. And it got to your point that you can actually achieve amazing results even under budget and faster than you even thought possible when innovation comes to bear and a strategic goal. And what lessons do you have on this kind of experience for countries of the Gulf as they work towards their zero, their targets, these zero emissions industries? So if you can also talk a little bit about that, it would be wonderful. But let's go in order, if you would, please. Talha, please. Please pick a question that you think is most relevant and answer.
Okay. I'll maybe not spend as much time on each of the answers, but maybe I'll do two. I know the doctor mentioned over here the importance of mangroves as part of the blue economy. I just wanted to mention how important and reiterate your point, how important that is. It's a huge pillar of the building and protecting the marine biodiversity, as well as building coastal resilience. One of the things that Earth has been working on over the last few years is a mangrove restoration project in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and the MSC Foundation, and it involves replanting 90,000 mangrove plants over 5 years. We're in year 2 of that, and we have 3 sites near Zulal in the north where work has been ongoing. So just wanted to highlight that, and it's very important, and to tie it to the broader trend of hearing about collaboration and cooperation among the GCC. It's the one thing that also, again, binds us together, and a lot of work is being done on this in the UAE as well. I'll talk about a little bit about the solar. I started my professional career in solar in Qatar. This was back in 2009 with the setting up of, back then, 2009, there was only a few countries that solar was still up and coming, specifically PV, but it was about how to build the business case for solar if we don't know how it's going to work here. So we set up a solar test facility to test technologies under real life condition. We're 15 years later. I won't spend too much time. There is a lot of solar in Qatar. There is roughly around 1 gigawatt installed, another 1 gigawatt being installed by 2029. It's going to be, I forget, I have it written down somewhere in my book, but like 2 gigawatts or so, basically totaling our renewable capacity to 20%. So our focus, mainly the country's focus, has been more on utility scale rather than mid and small scale. There is quite a few small scale installations or mid scale on roof car parking shades and rooftops in places like Musharraf and Qatar Foundation, but solar residential you don't see a lot of, strictly because a lot of houses are rental housing, right? That's one. So it's more of just a configuration, and then a lot of the other households have there's no payback on them because electricity is free. But we can talk about that later.
Can add a little bit on solar. Yeah. So for solar as well, the reason why we see it a lot in Lebanon is you have not a central production of power and a lack of fuel. Here, most of them are connected to the grid. And as Talha mentioned, most of the houses are 2 categories. One are rented houses, the other one are citizen housing. And the citizen primary housing is coming subsidized, so you get it for free for your primary house. What I see individuals implementing solar is in their secondary homes and farms. So whenever a lot of Qataris keep cattle and sheep and camels, and whenever you see their farmhouses, you will see solar, by the way. It became cheaper now, and you can see that they are implementing that. I think the target that Talha mentioned, it was around, the target is around 30%. So by 4 gigawatts, and we're really excited to see that happening. I can touch on another question if you want.
Yes, if you want to answer any other question, then we can go to Ola.
I don't want to skip Ola, so you can answer.
Please.
Yes, maybe first on solar. I think we're still underestimating solar just because of this, that it's different even from wind in the sense that it will be able to integrate in all sorts of building cities and materials and small scale information technology and so on. It's a kind of a revolution in its own that we just seen the beginning, I think, and now important possibility for this region. Then needed to maybe I ought to read this book as well, but I know somewhat about that example. I think it's interesting. The Danish experience is specifically a small country that also made this a world business, a world leading position. And if we look back, there's something to learn there. Maybe Sweden was ahead of Denmark. We had early piloting, large scale, kind of bigger windmills there on pilot projects involving state-owned companies, a lot of research. It was moving slowly but organized, and the Danish start from another angle. They led a lot of small-scale entrepreneurs and innovation running, and very quickly they were ahead of Sweden, and made this also an economic possibility or potential for Denmark in another scale. Now we're catching up, but I think that is something to learn there, and probably from that book or research as well, on how you can let these innovations run and gain from that strength. And I think especially in these kind of technologies, wind, solar, where there is actually no running cost, there's zero marginal cost, more or less. There is no fuel cost. So the learning curves from production you can trust them to reduce over time, and then you suddenly have these exponential developments that I think also this region will be able to gain from very quicker than we think. And finally, maybe a comment on natural sinks and trees mentioned. I mean, we know about trees in Sweden. We are a country of forests, but also they are affected by climate change already. Actually, the temperature difference changes more in Northern Europe, which will force us to, it's our core economy, our oil, so to say. And our industry will also need to change because of that. So in a way, we're being through those sometimes a bit painful experience as well to redirect your core national business, and it's part of your identity more or less as well. So I think there is something in common there. We will need to manage our forests a bit differently in this warming world.
Thank you. Davia?
Yeah. So I think there was a question on sustainable development aid that the GCC countries have been looking at, and I think the GCC have been doing really well in humanitarian aid. Recently came across some statistics. Most of the GCC development funds, they are giving grants actually rather than a shared fund where they can get their money back. And there's a lot of effort that has been looking into building sustainable development projects. So I'm aware of Qatar Fund for Development that have done projects in terms of building schools with solar and building smart fisheries in near Nairobi in Kenya. And what they have in mind, even in their auditing and the monitoring, they look into the sustainability aspect of it. So I think it is, again, an individual effort from the sustainability, from the funds, the development funds, to look into the sustainability aspect, and they integrate it as part of it. For the climate migration question, it's not my area of expertise, but I was really interested in it. I think one of the most difficult things is how do you quantify it? Because you have a lot of the areas where you have lots of climate migrations, but also they're conflict prone. And maybe also they're not the most economically strong economies where you see the migration. So they might attribute some of the climate migration either to economic migration or conflict migration. And this you have like a lot of intersection between them. So you don't have, okay, what are actually climate refugees? What are the normal refugees? I think we are not doing as much in there. And I would love to see more work on that.
Thank you. Anas?
Thank you. I think this gentleman was asked about the resilience of the communities in the country and the region. Our last original study on the green transition and the required skills in GCC and Yemen showed that, of course, as you just mentioned, that there are many sectors who are really leading in these transitions. Mainly are the transport, focusing on the air transport, mainly agriculture and the energy, focusing on the hydrogen supply. Yes, but I think in addition to this, the countries in GCC, they have very ambitious strategies to reduce those challenges, but also to mitigate the climate change. The reality is that we find is that the higher education institutions and the TVET institutions are not offering much to teach. The programs are still limited in terms of few of them at the universities, some universities in the country, and I think mainly in many other in the region, and the technical side on the lower, it's still requiring a lot of challenge to resolve, mainly on the skills gap. So the skills gap is the major problem now in a response to those solutions. Mainly, if the electrical cars, you are coming with electrical cars, electrical batteries, they are requiring really new skills which are not existing and offered in the market. But I think most important is the resilience. As we know, the market of the worker in the region is built on the foreigner worker force. And here is one of the most important things is to work on upskilling and reskilling those forces. And I think this is one of the major things which we would like to really to contribute all together on upskilling and reskilling those forces, because they are who are really be responsible into accompanying those transitions in the economy. So I think this cannot be done separate. It has to be done, in my opinion, in a collaborative way between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry in charge of climate change, and also the private sectors, because then I think those skills are really coming so fast. And here we need the courage to take very strong decisions in terms of what has been done in the other regions, like the recognitions of the micro credentials. So which the ministry now is taking this responsibility, and I think they are building those mechanisms of recognizing those micro skills for the nationals and for the non-nationals. And I think this mechanism is very strong. It's really required a lot of discussions between the private sector, between decision makers, and also the others who are really involved in this. And I think this is where, and I see this is an important takeaway or recommendation which we can just suggest in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We are actually very close to the end, but I would like to invite each speaker to, in less than a minute, maybe articulate one recommendation to policymakers in Qatar and the GCC about what they should think about or what their top priority should be. So just like one top priority, one major idea about what they should think about in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation. So, Talha.
I'll use a few seconds of my time just so there's no unanswered question. I know there was one on nuclear. I can't comment on the geopolitics of it, but I'll say that to solve the issues that we have in hand, there's no silver bullet. There's no panacea. We need all the solutions all the time, and we need to use whatever tools we have in our jurisdiction to be able to tackle climate change and adapt to it and mitigate it. I'll say, I mean, the most important things, and some of these things are things that we're already working on, but reiterating the fact that we, as Gulf countries, face very similar problems. They're unique to our region, but among us, we share them. And so much work gets done in all of the countries. The focus should be on regional collaboration on all the issues, starting from water, because we even share our water beds and groundwater resources, to tackling food security together, not as individual countries, but as a regional bloc, and even looking at air quality and protecting coastal resilience. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I would then kind of reiterate where I started in concrete terms, where I started on this integration of energy infrastructure, the grids, but also policy and markets. It brings with it so many benefits. I think that would be important to improve that way also in this region. But then just to agree to my colleague in general, that in this time we live, when it seems to be the message sometimes very much on one of us on his or her own, and it's like the world is a zero-sum game. It's not. That would not take us anywhere. We need to, and all those fears, whether physical or others, that's not the solution. Just to work together as such is an important message. I would put that for governments, but also maybe for the youth panel, following after us. There are many exciting possibilities in this. Actually, we basically know what's need to be done, and it could also be a great inspiration. And we need to do it together. And yeah, and the Nordic region might be an example. We have, of course, the European Union important for us, where we have a legal kind of cooperation that's far, but the Nordics did it much earlier in a very much more informal way. You don't need to wait for a regional parliament or anything like that. There are a lot of things that could be done in very practical terms, I think. Thanks.
Olivia?
I think there is a lot of knowledge that do exist in the GCC, and they have a wide network of partners going across the globe. So what I would give as a recommendation is to make use of that, to have a regional R&D alignment of what needs to be done that could help the region collectively, from early warning detective system, or having better climate models, or having better water security issues or resilience. That could be all coming about from having our priorities aligned together, and having that objectives coming together from the GCC perspective will give us more weight on the international scale to help. And also will help us transfer the knowledge for the post-climate change world that we live in here, and we can give it to other nations that would need it, especially the developing nations. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think from my perspective, I would recommend on partnership, mainly public-private partnership to lead on sustainable solutions. Using the collaborative approach rather than the competitive one, and I think this is our strongest things, which we can do more together, achieve better, and with the focus on the people's skills. This is my thought.
Thank you, Anas. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to just take a 10-minute break while we reorganize everything and get the panel set up for the youth panel. That's going to start at 11:45. Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for a really insightful and amazing discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you to our partners and collaborators, UNESCO, and everyone who helped with this together. And we'll take, again, just 10 minutes, take a quick break and come back.